The problem is, and this is really shallow, is the people are much better looking on the apps and hookup sites than they are on the dating sites. So you've got to kind of got a trade-off when you decide which ones you want to use. I'm on all of them. Hi, this is Mike. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Talks. Today, I'd like to discuss with you the process over a 50-year period during which how gay men and lesbians met each other and connected for relationships and sex has evolved dramatically. Starting way back in the 1960s, before Stonewall. It was a pretty bleak period. It was illegal to be gay, to be homosexual for the most part. You could be fired from your job, cut off by your family, excommunicated by your church, and thrown into a mental institution for being homosexual. As a result, not surprisingly, there were very few places to meet, and it had to be done very secretly. There were a few gay bars, but they were tightly controlled and constantly raided by authorities. If you were in a bar and the police came in and they either saw you dancing with another man or woman or touching another man or woman, you would be arrested and hauled off to jail. As a result of those tight strictures, it's no surprise that gay men found other more subterranean ways to meet in the bushes, in the parks, in toilets, on public restrooms on the highway or in parks or wherever, or at the bathhouses, there were a few legal bathhouses around the country where you could meet and go to the sauna ostensibly and have sex. So it was a pretty tough time, and the result was that gay men obviously had a lot of self-loathing. Along came 1969 and Stonewall, the insurrection that happened over 3 nights where gay men finally had had enough. Gay men, lesbians, and trans. There was a whole mixture that evening, people of color, etc. They fought back against the police, and that precipitated a new period during which things got better. The general perception is that it happened very quickly. But in reality, that was in 1969, and it took pretty much the rest of the 70s for this to work itself through and for gay men to be able to more openly meet without any consequences. For example, in 1973, the American Psychiatric Association finally removed homosexuality from its list of diagnostic mental disorders, which was the basis for putting gay men and lesbians in mental institutions if they were openly homosexual. In the mid-70s, around the time I came out in 1976, disco swept the country, first starting out in gay and black spaces and ultimately making it into the wider masses. And as a result, there was a lot more fraternization and socialization without the previous history of arrests and intimidation that happened in the 60s. In fact, my first affair, I met the guy in a disco in Washington, D.C. So things were getting better, and simultaneously, along with the kind of bar scene, and by the way, there were 2 guides, the Damron's Guide for the U.S. and the Spartacus International Guide for the rest of the world, where any gay or lesbian traveler could have a list of where they might find others like themselves in foreign cities and lands. But in any event, the other way that gay men and women often met was there was an explosion of underground newspapers in the 60s and 70s. But the Village Voice in New York and the Boston Phoenix in that city were examples of periodicals that had nighttime sections where personal ads happened, sort of like the Craigslist phenomena in the 2000s. And people would place personal ads in them to meet others. For example, I placed one in February 1977 in the Advocate National Gay Magazine, where I said, "All American and gay, seeks same." And as a result, I got more than 100 responses in writing, along with photos and descriptions, which I still have today. So that was a good way to do it, but it was ponderously slow. I mean, you would put an ad in for the following week. Maybe people would write you in the next week, and in the third week, you'd finally get their messages and respond to them, and maybe try to connect and meet up in a bar or coffee shop or whatever. So it was very slow. But I got a lot of responses from that ad in 1977 and continued using personal ads right up until I met my third boyfriend via a personal ad that I placed in HX magazine in New York in 1993. So this was the kind of state of things as we approached the end of the 70s. It was easier to meet. Bars were the focal point. There was still a lot of stuff going on in bathhouses and places like that for those who wanted quick action. But it wasn't the way it was in the 60s when you ended up potentially with a risk of a lost job or being thrown in jail if you were found out to be gay. This is what brings us to the AIDS era. On Friday, July 3rd, 1981, a small article appeared on page 20 of the New York Times that day, which stated that a rare cancer was found in 41 homosexual men in New York and Los Angeles. That was the first notice the world got that a new virus, soon to be renamed AIDS, had arrived. I remember being at the coffee table in my shared summer beach home with my roommates on Fire Island Pines on that Friday, and we were reading the New York Times at the coffee table. I was reading it out loud to them, and we were obviously taken aback, and we discussed it, and we were all wondering, will this have any impact on this? How will this affect us? And frankly, we didn't really think it was likely to have much of an impact at all. Little did we know. In fact, however, for a period of time, it didn't appear as if AIDS was going to be much of a problem. Unbeknownst to us, there were quite a number of gay men deep in the party circuit, those who went out every Friday, Saturday, Sunday evening, doing drugs every night, having multiple sexual encounters, and therefore wearing down their immune system, that who were getting sick and were beginning to die in large numbers. But if you weren't part of that group or friends with them, you weren't aware of that. And I wasn't. I was a closeted investment banker who went out occasionally. So it really took about 3 or 4 more years. 1984 or 5 was when AIDS spread into the more mainstream, widespread gay community and began to be a problem and to really initiate a panic among us. We pulled within. We stopped having sexual encounters the same way we had before. During the 1970s, gay men, for the first time in history, at least in this country, in the U.S., had discovered that we could have sex with whomever we want, whenever we wanted, as often as we wanted. And we took advantage of that. That's all that mattered. Most people, most gay men, really were not interested in the idea of a monogamous couple. Why, when you could have so much plenitude in sex, would you choose to be with one person? But now that AIDS arrived and the threat of death was in the air, suddenly a more conservative turn occurred. New York City and other cities closed the bathhouses because of their risk to public health. People stopped generally having sex as much, as indiscriminately, as often. And when it became apparent that condoms were the safest means of behavior to try to protect against AIDS, we went overnight from no one using a condom, no one being willing to consider using a condom, to almost everyone requiring it. So bars were there throughout this whole process, and I think traffic probably dropped some, but we were young, horny men, and we had to meet and find some way to connect while this disease was ravaging our community. Other things were developed as alternatives. I remember one group in New York City called Brunch Buddies would agree to arrange a date for you with someone they felt might be compatible for, $25 or something, and you'd go out with that person and report back on what happened. And I'm sure some people managed to find partners that way. The other common event was kind of a speed dating function that was being held at various bookstores in the LGBTQ centers in different cities, where they would organize 30, 40, 50 gay men in one place and we'd all be in a series of chairs in a circle facing each other, and one by one we'd stand up and introduce ourselves to the group and describe ourselves. And then afterwards, there'd be a period of mingling. And out of that, some dates and even couples probably arose. So these were the ways we tried to still be social in an era when death was an ever-present risk. Now, in the late 80s, something else happened or arrived for the first time. It was a new technology. It was the use of telephones for chatting and meeting each other. So you could call a chat line, like 1-800-CHAT, and they would connect you with other gay men, and you would chat with them for 99 cents a minute. So some telephone bills each month were pretty sky high. And at the end of that time, you decide whether you wanted to meet in person. And the only guidance you had to make that decision was the sound of that person's voice and his self-description. So it was a pretty risky and expensive way to meet, but it was very popular in the late 80s. This brings us up into the 90s, early mid-90s, when we started to see the emergence of the internet and a slow development of an online culture. So in the early 2000s, we started to see the emergence of the first in chat rooms on the internet. The first to emerge was CompuServe, followed by ICQ and AOL. And AOL is the only one of those still in existence today. But from maybe the late 90s to the mid 2000s, they were kind of the dominant way that gay men met each other. You could go online, and unlike the telephone chat rooms, you would have a photo of each person under their profile, so you would have an idea what they looked like, and it was free. Although you didn't hear their voice, you got to chat with each other through a text mechanism, and hookups often occurred pretty quickly. I had more than my share. I can remember one instance where I met someone in his apartment who had a superhero fetish and asked me to show up in spandex. I did, and the door was left unlocked, and I walked in, and he was hanging upside down in his gravity boots, and you can imagine the rest. But that's for another time and place. In any event, those were the dominant ways of meeting right up through 2005 or so. Then in 2001, Manhunt was created, and by 2005, it began to take over from the chat rooms. It was the first site or app where you could post photos, exchange photos, text with people, and there was a free membership, but it was pretty limited functionality. If you wanted to have access to all of the bells and whistles and as many people as you wanted to meet and as many photos as you wanted to share, you had to pay by the month and by the year. Manhunt today even claims to have 6 million members. But frankly, I stopped hearing about Manhunt a decade ago. Around about 2012, Grindr emerged, and it's been followed by Growler and Scruff and other imitators. Grindr is so popular. It's not too different from Manhunt. I think it has more functionality, but it's just become the accepted go-to place to meet people for hookups. And not only for hookups. I don't look to meet somebody any longer instantaneously. I want to chat with them and then go for coffee and then see how things turn out. And I put that out there on the site, and not everybody's happy with it. Those who are looking to hook up are probably frustrated, but other people appreciate it. In any event, that is the dominant way people meet today. We have gone from an era 50 years ago where it was all done in the bars, the bathhouses, and the bushes, or personal ads. And it was all in person, and you got a chance to size up the person and determine if there was sexual chemistry between you before you went off. 50 years later, that's lacking. It's all very transactional. On the other hand, we've gained speed and expediency. You can quickly go online, meet someone, and 15 minutes later be in their home. It's quite a trade-off. I think, frankly, we've lost something by not having the in-person meetings, but that's up to everybody to decide for themselves. You've been listening to a description of how gay men met from the 1960s through the 2020s. Thanks for joining us today. Stay tuned for additional episodes of BAMMER Tales and BAMMER Talks. This is Mike Balaban. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube page and sign up for notifications of future upcoming episodes. You can also be part of the BAMMER community by going to my Instagram page at BAMMER47, to follow me on our podcast episode series, BAMMER and Me, or going to our website, BAMMER.co, with stories submitted by LGBTQ people around the world. Thanks again. See you soon. Bye.